p.m. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, it's 1 minute before. Welcome. Looking forward partners to BEBC. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Trustee Thorne, Trustee Sousa, second, all in favor? Good. Okay, minutes of the November 22nd Board of Education Committee meeting. Motion to adopt, Trustee Schmidt, Trustee Thorne, all in favor? Okay, minutes. No, nothing on the action list. Petitions and delegations. The anti-racism policy. Superintendent Ray and Mike on the board.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And Mike, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, excellent. So I'll just begin and frame where we started and let Mike take over. So if you recall, this particular draft of a new policy, it was drafted by a very small group, which would have been an offshoot committee from the board ad hoc anti-racism group. And so we started with a number of people around the table. So we had a student representative, and actually from the Indigenous Leadership Group, we had Xiao Lu as a reporter from the discourse. And we also had our elder. We also had our district principal of education. We had a Cowichan Tribes member who was also part of our committee. And of course, we had Mike Greenslade, who happened to be part of our committee as well. And so we went through a very, I think, excellent process with regard to the development of this draft policy. And I'd like Mike to take it away, and maybe I'll tie it up at the very end in terms of where we go next.
All right. Thank you, Robin. First off, as we begin, I want to thank the members of the committee who are here with us today for all the time that they've spent throughout the board's anti-racism or the ad hoc anti-racism committee and coming to the table to help draft this policy. It was a long undertaking. We have been at this for between the two committees over a year now. And it's been a lot of hard and detailed work. And we're grateful that everybody came to the table with open hearts and open minds and being willing to do that work. Pardon me. So as we started the work on the actual policy itself, we started with a bit of an overview of what a policy is versus what an administrative procedure is and what the differences are to the board and to staff and how those are actioned, how they're worded, and how they're developed. So this was a little bit unique in that we had this committee come together to develop this policy. So what we did is we did some research and finding some really deep policies throughout North America that really spoke to true anti-racism, really confronting biases and confronting misconceptions. And we delved into those as a group. So we had 5 separate policies. We went through and looked at the meat and potatoes of them and what were the best parts to take from each of those policies that were both applicable to our context here in Cowichan, but also provided a deeper context and deeper understanding than what is typically found in BC and other school districts, or even across Canada. A lot of the time, the anti-racist work that that I'm involved with, and that those around the table are involved with, there's some really deep understanding coming out of the United States as well. So we looked at that too, and seeing what could work in our local context. So we took that information, we delved into those policies, we pulled out the best parts of them. And then we formed a draft policy. From there, we came back together as a group, read through that policy and made sure that the voices of everybody around the table were heard and that they were reflected in the policy, making sure that the feedback that we received was inputted in there and that concerns, questions, difference of directions, we were able to come together and find that policy and put that together. So from there, we took it back again. This is kind of a back and forth process that we did. Took it back again, really got a good polished version of our policy down, and then came back to the group with 2 questions, or with 2 things to look at. One was the name of the policy, and I'll get into that in a moment. And the other one was some key definitions that we thought were important to include with the policy. That giving context to the reader of when we say equity or we say equality, what those things actually mean to us as we look at this policy. So the first thing we did is we came back together for the name, not knowing if the name anti-racism policy actually encompassed all the work that we were doing as a collective. But looking deeper at it and saying, how can we make this more reflective of our work? And where we came to with that, pardon me, was looking at it from the first principle of the BC First Principles of Learning. And that is basically the way that we did it through our strategic planning as well. If you envision 3 concentric circles with me, not me, but you, the individual, me at the center, the we being the family, being the school community, and then the larger community. So that's how we looked at it. How can we frame this, the name of this policy, around that me, we, community part? And so we came up with a lot of words that we felt represented the policy. We put them together and ended up with a bunch of names, with a bunch of words, probably 20, 30 different words, but really looking at ones that clued in on me, the individual, we, the collective family or school community, and then the larger community. So through that, we came up with identity for the me, knowing that identity and having and being able to bring that full identity to our school, to our workplaces is very important. The we, the family, the belonging, and how that we can create that environment of belonging. And then if we have our identity solidified, we feel that belonging, what does that bring to the community? It brings the connection. So the group felt that the identity, belonging, and connection was a great name for the policy. And so we've put that forward to the board for consideration as well as part of this. If we move down to the definitions, we did a thorough dive into a bunch of definitions that, again, very much mirrored the work we did around the creation of the policy, finding some really good, solid definitions that we thought represented what those words meant to us, what they meant in our context, and what they would mean through this policy. So same process we went through in the policy. We brought those definitions in. We had robust discussions around them, which were fantastic to hear all the different points of view. We edited those. We've adapted them, and we've put them forward as part of the policy here. So that's what we bring to the board, is a year's worth of work and some really great conversations and hard work that we're all happy to be able to present here.
Thank you, Mike. And just to the board, we are cognizant that as of yesterday, and thank you, Trustee Croft, that we had an anti-racism provincial strategy that actually came out as of yesterday. We knew it was coming. It was supposed to come in the fall, but it came out yesterday, just right in line with this. And so we do not have a motion for the board today, but what we'd rather like to do, and what we're suggesting, is that we would like to actually dive deep, look at that provincial anti-racism strategy, and see how and if this aligns very well with this policy. We're also cognizant of our equity in action and the work that we've done there and how we're going to actually have an action plan. And so before we bring this back for a motion to the BEBC that would then go to the board meeting, we would like to actually do our work and actually look at that strategy, because as it just came out yesterday, we haven't had a chance to actually look at it as well. And so when Mike and I were speaking earlier about this evening, we would like to propose that it gives a little bit more time and we ensure that everything's in alignment and that it reflects everything from this policy to the provincial strategy as well.
Yeah, questions, Trustee Sousa and then Mr. Thorne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that sounds, that makes a lot of sense. I did have 2 questions though. Just one was understanding the support, the second paragraph, the reference to, at least the way it reads, to Samasa as a Hokkien speaking people. They're not. No, they're not. Yeah, so that, and they're referred to a little later as well as Nchant people. So that should be removed because it otherwise gives the impression that they are Hokkien speaking. And then the second question is on the definition of equity as well. And I'm just curious, in the definition where it says ensuring equitable outcomes often requires different treatment and resources for various people. I'm wondering why that, as opposed to historically marginalized people, if there was a conscious reason for just sort of keeping it various people as opposed to a more sort of precise definition that I've basically seen around equity.
Through the chair, I'd like to, well, firstly, I'll go to the first one. We will rectify that. Yeah, it's the first one. And then secondly, I think that this one was quite a very interesting definition to try to achieve. And so I think that that could be something that could be considered. And so I think as we look at this, bring it back to maybe the next month's BEBC, after we do some alignment, we can certainly look at that.
I just wanted to flag it at this point in case it goes, since you're going to have more discussion.
Thank you.
I know that the one that's come out yesterday is very, very lengthy, but it does tie a lot into this, and it actually in some cases goes beyond. But yeah, I think the two are going to dance well. Except we're not going to have 20 pages.
Trustee Cross.
Well, I understand that the team has tried to be really comprehensive, but I don't see just the whole aspect of culture really on it here. We've put a lot of things on the list. Culture comes up as a mention in the first, but it doesn't really get any play later on. So I just think that that needs more emphasis. Sorry, I don't have the paragraph, but the phrase is to right historical wrongs. This board has absolutely no authority or capability to right historical wrongs. I think instead that we, because I see that as more of a legislative thing. Joe, you make that more on that. But I think that respecting, I don't know, it's the phrase. I know we need to make up for stuff, but to right historical wrongs as well, specifically, is beyond the capability of the authority of the board. And I also would like to see it tie in more to our strategic plan. And I don't see any verbiage or connection to our strategic plan, which also references a good many of our values. I think everything in here is correct. And I think everything in here is certainly work that we want to do. So my only concerns are some of the context, and of course, aligning it with the new anti-racism minister's policy will be critical to, and I look forward to that.
Just to clarify, this year I've been assigned to put together another series on Indigenous learning. And in that series, we're going to talk about how we can help the teachers go through a transition to properly do this without making anybody feel bad. It's going to be very platonic. So we are going to work on that, and you will see I'm off to Vancouver next month to start. So it's going to be interesting. And though I don't like the wording, correcting wrongs, we're going to do it very nice, because since the discoveries we've been talking about, at one point it was just a word they called reconciliation. I got up at every AGM and said that it was just a word. And since being more and more involved with Indigenous eds and GLC, we've come together saying that we're going to take the family approach to this and do it very honestly. And our targets this year are going to be working for the teacher, so that he or she is no longer scared about what he or she teaches in class, and make corrections as we go along. So that no one will really notice the transition. And we will get to the point where we're going to be speaking the truth.
Trustee Schmidt, go.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for spending so much time and hard work on bringing this draft forward, and recognizing that there might be some crinks in here that we have to tweak a little bit, but I want to acknowledge the hard work that was put into this. In flipping through this K-12 action plan that came through, a lot of it's driven into the strategic plan, really, and how to change the way the district goes. And yes, I can see that you want to probably look at it to make sure that everything aligns. But I think this was a really good start. And I want to say thank you for the hard work because I know countless hours went into this. So I just wanted you to know that it was appreciated.
You first. Dean.
Oh, I'm curious because I obviously wasn't here last year when you started to work on this, but I'm curious if there's would there be a training piece that would go along with this? Because, when you're talking about things like systemic racism and anti-racism, it's even just definitions around equity and whatnot. It's it can be very technical and difficult to understand. So I'm curious if, in order to better and support employees through the board and the district, would there be at some point a bit of a training piece that would come with this too?
To the chair, keep in mind this is policy and at a high level, and the AP would be part of how do we operationalize it. And so I could absolutely see that being part of it.
This is very in-depth. You just tell people to put a lot of work, a lot of thought into this, and a lot of people coming together. So Trustee Schmidt said, thank you to all who worked really hard on this. In reading this on the weekend and then looking at a few other things, other anti-racism policies, couldn't find anything really this in depth. And I haven't looked at the provincial policy. One of the things I did find is, and I think we need to have in there is, over the years, anti-racism policies have done their best to get it right, but every year we continue to evolve. So, and I see one in there from the BCSD that said, continue to learn, which would be very helpful. Because years or 4 years, we're going to want to change it again. Trustee Canada.
Question to the superintendent. Did we ever get a final report? Because Candace and I shared the chair for the racism. And Kevin, did you get a final report?
It wasn't an expectation at the time with regard to that report. What it was at the very end was that we were going to strike a subcommittee to begin this work. And so this would be the outcome of that particular ad hoc committee. And I do want to make it clear to the board here that we were very explicit with all the team members that came forward, with all of our partner groups, and QP was there as well, of course, the SD, that we made it very clear that this was a draft that the board is going to tweak, make changes, make new suggestions. They may decide they don't even like the title, but that it was the work that was given to them to work through as a collective unit. And so I think that your feedback has been very helpful. And I know that Mike is taking down, I'm writing a few notes, and we'll certainly continue the work.
Trustee Schmidt and Trustee Crowe.
Through the chair, the superintendent, when we finally get this through and you build your administrative procedures behind our policy, would it be possible for you to bring it back for new trustees to understand how that looks, that, with the administrative procedures going to you versus the policy belongs to us, so they can see the two documents together so they can understand that a bit better?
Sure, absolutely.
Trustee Croft and Trustee Souza.
I just think maybe my earlier comments were cranky or expressed poorly, and that's not how I feel. So I would also like to express my thanks to the committee for their hard work. Sometimes the perfectionist sort of gets away from me, so I apologize if it's a bit harsh. And I also wanted to comment on your comment, Mr. Chair, regarding continuing to learn. And one of the things, my other job, one of the phrases we come upon is when we're writing this kind of stuff about staying open. And the phrase that comes to mind is equity seeking groups. Because you know what? We get a really long list of people who have different kinds of needs in your community. And I want you to say, yes, we're always going to be responsive to equity seeking groups. Now you've got a statement that you can stay open to.
Trustee Souza.
Yeah, I mean, I love the title of this, but I also love this, and I love the story behind it and how it connects to, me, we, and community. So I'm wondering, I know typically it doesn't go into policies, but I'd love to see a little preamble, sort of like making that explicit. Title of the policy and how it, and the little story behind it. I think it'll just give this a lot more meaning. So that's my suggestion. And also to say thank you for the really hard work that the community put into this over the last year.
Also, right now, and it just really reflects on how far we've come. So it's an honor to be a part of this. The only question that I have moving forward, is there a timeline? Is there, like, do we have a period of time that we want to see this work done? We want to see because I haven't really had the kind of deep dive that I would like to have into this to bring this back.
Sure. I would hope that we had an idea. We were ambitious. We were thinking of this month, and then of course the provincial strategy came through. But I think that, the time that it takes to have the quality of work and the understanding and the revisions, I would say that, it would be something that we probably want to wrap up by the end of the year. And that would be the policy as well as the AP.
Any other comments? Well, thank you to all. We'll work through this and we'll look forward to the next step. Moving on, business and operations, Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you. This afternoon, I'm here with the 2022-2023 amended annual budget. And my goal is by the end of this brief presentation on the changes in the budget, that the committee will recommend the budget to the board for adoption. So the bulk of the board's budget work happens in the spring, but as I updated the board on January the 3rd, we have to adjust for service levels that increase due to population change and any other known factors that may have occurred. So I don't know if everybody can see that. It looks really small from back here. So I'll zoom exceptionally big here. So on the revenue side, one of the adjustments we made from when we presented in January was to create a special purpose fund for the early care and learning grant. So originally when I presented, that was in the operating fund. So a special purpose fund is a fund that has restrictions or rules around how the board can spend it. And so the province had set out in the budget instructions that the $175,000 grant that we received for early care and learning to do the study for our district was to be set as a special purpose fund. So I reduced the revenues and moved them into the special purpose funds. It's not lost money. It's just I had to take the expenditures that were associated with that 175. It's not quite 175 because I brought in the FSA grant that also arrived, but had been awarded for the district to do FSA marking. So that has come out and made an adjustment. This budget is going to rely a little more on surplus, but I'll explain where the surplus is at. Okay, because what I've actually had here, now we look at the salary components. You're going to see that I put a line item in there for contingency for teacher salaries. When I brought the projection to the board, it was so close, and I think we all at how close that was on a $37 million budget or $38 million budget I was projecting with, not even within $100,000. So I have parked some money there just as a contingency within that budget, which could be for leave replacements or other things that may happen. If it's not spent, it just goes back into the surplus. So it's just me trying to be cautious of a budget that I thought was a little bit close and should have some extra wiggle room in it. Not much change throughout the rest of the salaries there. You see one of the excluded salaries going down. That is because that salary is tied to that fund that I just mentioned above, the early care and learning fund. Not a big change. On benefits, when we were back on the 3rd of January, I was saying that we need to add some additional benefit costs for the additional casual replacement budgets that we put in. So I'd added $700,000 because of where we were trending with some of our absenteeism rates in the first part of this year. And I needed to add corresponding benefits to go along with those costs. So that $700,000 is actually more like $850,000 due to the benefits that go with those positions. On the plus side, we hadn't yet booked a one-time benefit premium holiday. And for the new members of the board and the gallery, sometimes we overpay our premiums from the year before because they're based on an estimate of what we think or what the actuarial thinks is going to cost the school district for the extended health benefits. And if people go, so what happened during the pandemic is nobody went to the dentist or got a chiropractor appointment or a massage. So the year after, everybody went to the dentist, the chiropractor, the massage, and the rates went way up. And so the estimate was based on that. And then we're 1 more year in, and then it had tailed off. And we've been paying premiums on that high usage rate. And so there's a one-time benefit premium holiday of $369,000 that we're now taking advantage of. But guess what? It's one time. It becomes a cost pressure next year when we take it back out and we'll budget over. We have had, this has been an interesting year for, I'd say, legal costs and costs associated with investigations. So it's off to a high start. We're going to overshoot that budget. So I need to make some adjustments to ensure we align with our actual costs in regards to those services. We needed to include a learning resource rollover from the previous year that we noted was missed when we were doing our final reconciliation. So that's been brought in. And our waste disposal was a little bit higher. So overall, that it changes our expenditures by about $227,000 and our revenues by about $227,000. This was what we would say would be material changes on a $96,999 budget. A couple $100,000 and $97 million really isn't a lot of material change since we last looked at it. There's an impact on the surplus. When we concluded the year, we had $3,853,000 available. And after this budget, we see the unrestricted surplus available for future years is $4,068,000. So it's grown by $215,000. Assuming that everything is on, again, we're still really relatively halfway through the school year. We still have another half to go, and you never know how cold the winter is going to be, how cold the February is going to be, or the March or the April. And last year we got surprised with a colder April, and we never get absenteeism. It's just always all over the map as to how we're doing based on the flu season and people's overall health, or staff's overall health and student health. And I certainly know that I haven't seen anything slow down in the trends around usage for leave replacements. People staying home when they're sick because they were told to, and now that costs money. So I still think we're in a really healthy unrestricted surplus. Then we have the budget bylaw here. It is going to be in the amount of $117,867,574. It is all laid out for you in the bylaw document, but I would like to go to a couple of pages here. The actual bylaw. Just going to zoom it up here a bit. Oops. The operating budget is the combination of the top two lines. So the $96,854,000 is what is in our operating budget. $144,000 is being transferred to capital from operating. So the operating budget is funding some software and a major portable move out to Paulson this year. Then you have your special purpose funds, and they're at $15 million. And you see that is up from last year at about $14 million. The main reason for that would be the costs related to our collective agreement. We call it Classroom Enhancement Fund. So it's a fund that the ministry provides to school districts when you have collective agreement language that has been restored from the 2002 language with teachers. And so our remedy projections are higher this year, and the funding has come up with that, as well as the wage costs associated. And then under capital fund, total expense. This really, when we buy big capital, we don't recognize the revenue and the expense in the year that we buy it. So we'll get into this as we talk about budget, but it's amortized in over the life of the budget. So if the ministry gives us $20 million for a project, and we spend $20 million for a project, we don't book $20 million in revenue and a $20 million expense. we bring that revenue in over the life of the object that we purchased. So if it's a 50-year asset like a building, 1/50th of that 20 million comes in each year, and 1/50th of that expense comes in each year. So that's why that looks like it's quite a small number, because it's really that overall amortization of those assets that have been purchased at a future date. Now, certainly our building balance is going to go up substantially as we conclude couch and secondary, and that amortization number will continue to go up, and that's probably why you're seeing it up here now. We also have something called a half-year rule, which is a new accounting policy that's been implemented this year. So previously, you would buy all your assets in a particular year and not bring them into that amortization until the following year. So not start to depreciate them until the following year. And under anybody who understands generally accepted accounting principles, that was an exception to the rule, the way we were handling it before. And government's now said, no, you now have to have something called a half-year rule, which you bring in half the value of the asset in the year that you buy it and amortize it. So we're going to see that capital fund expense go up over the years. And then the $15,000 there is related to the board's commitment on a custodial replacement plan to start drawing down your local capital to pay for that multi-year plan for custodial equipment that was part of the prior year's budget commitment. So all of that leads us to $117,867,574 bylaw. There's tons of details in here on the schedules. If you look at them and have any questions, or if you want me to go through them in more detail, I'm happy to, certainly. But this is a really high-level summary, and you'll get much more detail as we go next year's budget and understanding of what's in these documents.
Any questions?
Jason, we talked about this last budget when we started talking about the new high school. We knew that we were going to start looking at difficulties and remedies this budget term. So looking at this, it just kind of tells you we're on track, and we don't have to open up the ask for bottom just yet.
Yeah, one of the documents that's going to come into the next budget process is a multi-year forecast. And it looks like if you did the same thing you're doing today and you don't generate any more surplus, how long is your surplus going to last? And it's 2 years, and it's gone. And so I mean, it still is a concern, and it's something that you'll be considering as you figure out how much of that surplus do you bring in to help balance next year. And that will be part of the next presentation. It can be used quite quickly. And so it's part of what the board does is plan appropriate use of those extra dollars. But you're right, it's not as tight as it has been in many, many years before. Trustee Thorne.
Just to add one more thing, I know the ministry is now looking at changing how things are funded, so there could be a chance we may get another break yet. That's up and coming, so I have nothing. I see nothing in writing other than a comment from Minister of Education saying we're going to review the funding process.
One of the things you don't see reflected at all in this budget are the wage settlements for this year, and that's purposeful because the ministry didn't ask us to book any revenue related to them because they haven't determined it yet. We're still in the ratification of the support staff collective agreements, so the teachers are done, and they are going to be funding those agreements, and they are going to be funding the exempt staff increases as well. So, that's not here. We didn't build the expenses in because we wouldn't have balanced not having any revenue. And we would then have the optics that we have this deficit budget that, we know we don't have. But we don't know what those match. We're yet to know whether or not the funding coming in matches the expenses coming out. So actually, our department has to take this budget and create an amended budget just to operate with in order to be able to forecast from, because we bring you those projections. I can't do a projection off this document. It's already completely out of whack with what we're paying for the teacher increases because they're already in the system, but not here, so I can't compare them. So we have to do an amended budget just for internal purposes, and we'll show you that at some point as we understand the revenue come in and what those expenses are that are going to match. This is just a schedule that you would see here of where we're spending the money, the teachers and principals, and the comparatives to the prior year. So there's a lot of details in here if you wish to explore them. And you can see this is comparing this year's amended to last year's amended.
Trustee Schmidt.
Actually, you answered a couple of my questions because I was wondering if there was going to be another amended budget when that all happens, hopefully sooner rather than later. And because we're going to have a budget class after this anyway, I would like to move the Board of Education Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education School District 79 Crouch Valley adopts 2022 to 2023 amended annual budget amount of $117,867,574.
Thank you. And second, two of them, Mr. Thorne. And all in favor? And all opposed? Motion carried.
One more item. Allow me to go to the budget guiding principles. The reason they're here ahead of schedule. So my thanks to Mike for rolling forward the prior year's budget guiding principles, adapting them for some of the things that we know today. And so one of the reasons for having budget guiding principles is they remind us at the start of all of our budget sessions how we're going to build this budget. Of course, it's going to be in alignment with the board's strategic priorities, but these principles provide other areas that we also need to be thinking about. So what's being proposed here are for this year that aren't that different than previous years, or that they align with the priorities of the Beyond Education Strategic Plan. So as we go through budgeting, we try to make an alignment to what the board's strategic priorities are. So when you're presented options, they align with one of those four, hopefully. It's developed as a mechanism to aid in reconciliation. So we're carrying this one over as well. So what are we doing in our budget process that aids in reconciliation? It's developed on the principle of equity. And we've just looked at a definition of equity, and it doesn't mean equal, but it means something else. Must be developed in a transparent process that includes public and partner input. And it's not just collecting that input, but it's also that reporting back on the decisions that are made. So that's part of the transparency is, okay, this is what we heard, and this is what we've done with that information and the decisions that have been made. A new one is to account for the uncertainties of inflationary pressures. So this one used to be to account for the uncertainties of the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, now we don't know what inflation rates are going to be, and certainly we have more control over our wages. We know exactly what's been bargained, but we don't know on our services and supply rates what that's going to be for the next year. It needs to comply with the School Act, collective agreements, and other regulatory requirements and board policy. That's just to remind us that there's some structures around this process. For instance, we can't budget less than what's been negotiated on the collective agreements. They're negotiated. We can't budget in a way that doesn't comply with the School Act deficit. We want to consider multi-year implications of decisions. So I mentioned that we've just done a 3-year multi-year budget plan based on this budget and rolling it forward and seeing what we think it's going to be in general revenues. That's thinking about how you're going to utilize your surplus. Balance is short-term and long-term priorities. If you spend all your money today, you may not have any money to do things in the future, but maybe there are things that are really, really important to do in the short term that are going to have an effect long-term. So, understanding the difference between those priorities. And then to maintain an appropriate contingency balance that's in policy, and that's to maintain between 1% and 3% of budget. So we bring these here as we would like to bring them to the board at the next board meeting. So if the committee doesn't have any other ideas around these, we would ask for a recommendation to send to the board table for the February 7th board meeting for adoption, because that allows them to be embedded into the survey that's going to go out to the public and partners and parents and staff and students on the February 7th.
Thank you. Questions, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you through the chair. I'm glad you mentioned that in terms of process. So this is good. It's very helpful. But I'm wondering though, if a guiding principle also isn't to consider the input of the public and partners and whatnot. Like, is this going out to them? I think it might be useful for them to see themselves in it. as well, if they're in, or is it kind of implicitly noted here somewhere?
I
That
think it's in number 4.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on.
We make a motion to move these forward to the board approval.
Hey, trustee Schmidt, trustee Thorne, I see the other side of you. All in favor? Okay, motion carried.
That concludes my report.
Thank you. Committees, highlights of the January 17th, 2023 advisory committee.
Hi. Yeah, I'll just remind people that a few years ago, the board decided that just to make sure that the advisory committee was well represented, that there would be a brief verbal report at each of the BEBC meetings. So that's why your stuff is moved. I just want to say it's such a pleasure to meet with all of our professionals and their partners, and they're just so caring and intelligent about all the different things that we do for our kids. So I just really look forward to it. I hope you guys do too. We had some positive reports on the distribution of the affordability fund. We heard that QP is dealing with violence in schools, which is very worrisome, but we were also heartened to hear, quote, they are working through it. So we hope that there is positive progress in making work life and school life a lot more positive for our folks. QP also does 2 annual tours of the schools, which is a I was really impressed with that, and I think that really pulls our community together and shares a lot of important on-the-ground knowledge with everyone. DPAC would like everyone to know that they need volunteers. The teachers, of course, while everybody's involved with report cards, there were some issues and suggestions about opening the online report card platform a little earlier. Teachers felt they were a bit rushed having to do it all so close to the deadline, so maybe that's something that can be heard. Just to let you know, the Shemana Secondary School, Rhonda, Vice President Rhonda LaForge, brought in literally the biggest presentation we'd ever had, which was a 10x10 tree of hope that will be on display in the Shemana Secondary foyer. It was this pink series of handprints on this tree with various positive messages of hope. The committee reviewed the equity scan rubrics with the general consensus, which was that yes, we've accomplished great things, and B, there's lots more good work to be done in terms of providing equity, education, and environment to all of our students and staff. And of course, we had the privilege of expressing appreciation and many good wishes to Charlie Coleman because he's retiring at the end of January. I don't know what we'll do with ourselves without Charlie at the advisory meeting, so we will chug along. And that's my report.
Thank you very much. That being all, can I get a motion for adjournment? Please? Schmidt, say, all in favor?